Hi, my name is Gwen Walker, and I am the Vice President of EDI for Musical Theater Educators Alliance, and I'm very excited to begin what I'm calling part one of this conversation about disability affirmative theater with special guests Britt Burr, Michele Dunleavy, and Ben Raanan. Is that how you say it, Ben? My
Raanan, but close enough. No one ever gets it.
Raanan.
Raanan, but literally, don't worry. Call me whatever. Raanan is good.
No, say it again for me, please.
Raanan,
You're
like you're gonna have a raw and then you're gonna eat a naan. Raanan.
Raanan.
Yes.
Okay. I'd love for my panelists to introduce themselves. I do not enjoy when the host introduces people because it's so dry and you all have wonderful things to say about your work. And I would love to go around and start with Britt and have you tell us about hi, my name is, my pronouns are, oh, I forgot to say my pronouns are she, her, my pronouns are, and here's who I am, here's where I am, and here's some of the work I've been doing.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, everybody. It's a joy to be here and just supporting similar work and have each other's back in that. So it's rare to see this work up and coming, and hopefully it'll be less rare as we have this conversation and the conversation continues. So awesome. So my name is Britt Burr. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. Either works. It's 100% completely fine, whichever one you use. And I am the creative director of Barrier Free, located in Sykesville, Maryland. Barrier Free is a nonprofit disability service organization that specializes in inclusive theater work specifically, which is what we'll talk about today. But we also do other creative outlets and artistic programs that use not only theater productions, but visual arts, workshops that promote self-advocacy and social engagement. So we are in Sykesville. We're this community hub that empowers our neurodivergent folks to express themselves authentically and help them develop, critical life skills and communication skills. So very passionate about accessibility and inclusion and breaking down those societal barriers and providing a safe, welcoming space for neurodivergent folks so they can create, express, achieve, and grow and thrive artistically and socially.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Britt. I'm going to ask that we leave our mics on so that it's like we're together. And I'm going to ask Michele to introduce herself.
Sure. Thanks, Gwen. Hi, everyone. Thanks for dropping in. It's great to be in this space with these amazing folks here. I work at Penn State. I've been in the musical theater program there for 20 years, which when I say still feels like it makes my heart do a little thing. I don't know what it is, but it does a thing. I have been working consciously in access and inclusion for about 5 to 6 years now. I started by being invited to host an event here on campus called Let's Dance, which is an all ages, all abilities family movement workshop. I said, sure, when they asked me. And then I was told that there was going to be a group there called the For Good Troupe that was going to open. They were going to be the opening act. And I was like, oh, great, what's that? And they said, oh, it's a troupe of Down syndrome performers. And I had a moment of panic because I thought, I've never worked with people with disabilities before, and I don't know how to do that. But I did in some way. It was fine. I mean, I'm saying all this because I guess I sort of stumbled into it, if that makes any sense. But after that event, the director of the For Good Troupe, who is now my dear colleague and collaborator, Dr. Krista Wilkinson, she works in health and human development. She said to me, I think we could work together. I think that there's something here, and we could design a course that brings together the performing arts and communication skills in people with disabilities. And I said, sure. So she wrote the course, and we've been teaching it now for 7 years. It's called Supporting Communication Through Performance. So the work that we do in that course is with folks with and without disabilities, college-age students working together, learning different performance modalities, improvisation, voice movement, dance, African drumming, together universal design, no hierarchy. And then we devise a performance and we perform at the end of the semester. We do 2 public performances on campus. So that's the work I do academically. I also volunteer in the community. I work with the For Good Troop. I serve on the Center Region Down Syndrome Society Board of Directors. And I spent my last sabbatical running around the country, getting to know folks like Ben and Britt and finding out what other folks were doing in this sphere and learning from them and being in community with them. So that's my story.
Well, let's also say Michele is the Penn State laureate this year, which is an enormous
I am.
accomplishment, achievement, and Michele is out there spreading the good word of dance across the entire state of Pennsylvania this year.
Yep.
And-
And making all of my presentations as inclusive as possible. So we have lots of conversations on the front end about that. And I think that's something that'll come up tonight as we're having conversation. Yeah.
Fantastic. Ben.
Hiya, I'm Ben Raanan. I am the artistic director, although as of 2 weeks ago, I've been newly dubbed the autistic director because I accidentally said that. And I am autistic. And I went and someone said, that's brilliant. So I said, let's do that. So I'm the autistic artistic director of Family Theatre Company. Like I said, I have a disability, I'm autistic, and I have Erb's palsy in my left arm and was born paralyzed, but have about 50% mobility on my left side now. Family Theatre Company is the longest running disability theater in the United States. We are 1 year off from being the longest running disability theater in the world. Oily Cart in London has us beat. I keep trying to convince them to close so I can take the title, and they keep saying no, which I think is rude. But that's fine. I took over this position about 4 years ago. My kind of thesis of my art is artistically rigorous theater with, for, and about those with disabilities. I really try and focus less on, I would say, the kind of educational side of it, which I think is fantastic, but I think is a thing that a lot of folks, that's kind of their first intuition when they think about disability theater, of like, oh, I'm going to go after the nice little disabled people and they're going to try really hard, and it's going to be lovely, which there are many, many companies that do that, and I think that's fantastic. It's just kind of not what I'm interested in. Been directing professionally plays and musicals, specifically about disability, for about 12 years. And then there were 3 years where I tried to do non-disabled stuff and it just didn't go well. I don't know. Those non-disabled folks are wild.
Gosh.
God, monsters. Monsters.
Boring.
Things that make sense. It's horrible. But yeah, I've been at Family for 4 years now. Directed 2 versions of Cost of Living, which is the new hot play that people think is about disability but actually isn't. I'm in like a shady mood today, by the way, in case that's all right. Just directed the first ever all disabled chorus line here at Family Theatre Company, which we're really excited about. Did Spring Awakening, Spitfire Grill. And we just announced 2 nights ago, I'm doing 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, and then we are programming Pippin with an all-disabled company. We work with every kind of disability under the sun. We take a very non-hierarchical look at disability, so there is no such thing as a person in a wheelchair is more disabled or less disabled than a person with depression or a person with PTSD or a person with Crohn's disease or MS. Which is, I think, like a very societal thing to do, is to put people on lists of what's disability and what's not. So we always say, if you are in a place where the traditional model of theater doesn't fit for you, but you're excellent, come hang out with us. And that's what we've been doing.
Awesome.
Oh, and my pronouns are he, him, by the way.
That's amazing. It's amazing. Well, I am very, very humbled and honored to be here with you all today. And I look forward to learning from you. So I'm going to start the conversation by saying this is a musical theater educators alliance EDI forum. And so what that means is that the people who watch this teach musical theater. It does not mean that they're professors necessarily. A lot of us are. A lot of people have private studios. A lot of people educate children. It's musical theater education for all. And so my first question is, what can people do, who educators do right now, ideas that you have or thoughts that you have, that would create a more inclusive environment for disabled theater performers? What small steps could we take that would make things better?
I'll start. Oh, go, Michele.
I wasn't going to say, I just took a breath and then Britt started to speak and then you started to speak. So either of you please go and then I'll
Mine was
chime
just
in.
like, sure, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking, at what point of entry are we talking about?
Right, right.
Because I remember, Ben, you and I actually talked about this way back when I reached out to you, I don't know, I guess over a year ago, about coming out to work with family. And you had said something about, well, there's not a lot of options for disabled performers to train, right? To get like the kind of professional level training that we assume other folks are going to have walking in to an audition, maybe in New York. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Ben, but it was something along those lines. And so when I guess because I teach at a university, that's where I'm thinking, like that point of entry. Is that sort of where we're talking about, or are we talking about prior to that? Because I think
that's part of it though, right?
it sure is.
That's something to consider. It's all, that's part of the considerations that need to be made when you're teaching, musical theater.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll speak briefly. I mean, the experience here at Penn State, we haven't, I mean, this is a complicated question. I think well, when I think about representation and I think about recruiting, for example, right? If there's no representation in the program, in the faculty, then it makes it, I think, difficult for someone to see themselves there, to even inquire as to, is this a place I would want to train? So that's even step one. But beyond that, I think we have to be prepared. There are tangible ways to be prepared to accommodate a variety of disability. And while you can't preemptively do that, I don't think we're prepared to do it hardly at all. That's my experience.
Yeah. Can I piggyback off of that?
Piggyback away.
So, with the company that I run, it is an all-inclusive theater company. So we have folks that are neurodivergent, folks that aren't, and we create original content. So we write the shows ourselves, and it's not a pre-written show. They design the script and story themselves, which gives them a little bit of autonomy over the story. So I think that's important, some ownership over that. And then with traditional style of theater, what I've noticed, at least historically, being I've taught in a theater department, I've auditioned myself. It is very one size fits all auditioning model. So accommodations, if we're looking for what can be more equitable in terms of individuals with disabilities, is accommodations during the audition process is kind of where if there is an audition for a company, that helps, with reading comprehension. Is it a cold read, or do we get the script in advance? Do we get the music in advance? Can we hear it beforehand? Those things could be really, really good. So I know there's a lot of like talented actors that just can't do it cold read style. But if they had it in advance, they could prepare, and that's what theater is all about anyway. You're rehearsing it over and over again. Asking them to do something on the fly could be challenging. So accommodations during the audition process would be beneficial.
Yeah, I'll say, like, to, like, there are obviously like very specific things that one can do to make something more inclusive, and like that's the boring stuff for me. Like that's the stuff that you're like, here's a list, do these things and you're good. I
Right.
think there are two kind of holistic ideas that I approach. I think the first, and they're both incredibly obvious, and sound silly until you talk to people and you're like, why aren't you doing that? The first is talk to disabled people,
Yep.
which is this weird thing because I think as a society we have been told we still believe that disability is bad, even if we don't intellectually believe it societally, it's still kind of programmed into our hearts. And what that leaves us with, and this happens a lot, and like honestly, like my main source of extra income is like calming down directors who have cast somebody with a disability and are terrified to actually work with them. And so, most moments of my day are filled with disability, whether I'm working with my own, whether I'm working with somebody else's. For like the past 15 or so years, and yet I know very little about somebody's body. I know very little about somebody's mind. The person who will always know their body best is the person. The person who always knows their mind best is the person. And it seems so obvious, but we have this idea of like, if I go to you and say, hey, I see that you are blind, how can I best serve you? We have this idea that like the person will be like, what? I'm blind? I had no idea. That they know they're blind. I know I'm autistic. I know I have a bum arm. That's all good. I think as educators, we are paid not well enough, but somewhat to be the experts in the room. And so I think it scares us when somebody comes in and we go, I have no idea what to do. And so we start throwing things at the wall. And that's oftentimes where hurt comes in. That's oftentimes where the least accessible practices come in, rather than, hey, I'm here. I don't know what you need. Even if I've worked with this point, maybe 40 or so blind actors. Every blind actor is a brand new actor. Every blind actor wants something different. Some want to be led on stage. Some are like, get the hell off me. Some want to use their cane. Some want to count steps. And like my job as director or educator is to actively listen to the person and honor how they see the world through their lens. I won't tell that story because we're going to run out of time. I'm a story guy, so I tell a lot of stories. So just keep telling me not to tell stories. And then I would say the second thing is redefine what the words good and better and best mean in your vocabulary. Because that's not something we typically use in any other sort of art making, right? We don't go, well, this is the best Van Gogh painting. You might have a personal preference, but art is not made to be hierarchical. Art is made to blossom. And so if we're constantly trying to go, well, that actor, it wasn't good because they didn't hit that step, it doesn't make sense. Look at what is happening in front of you instead of what's not happening in front of you. And I think especially when it comes to disability, we're constantly trained to go look at all the things that can't happen instead of the things that can happen. And when you relitigate that and you change that, suddenly you're like, oh my God, not only was that just as good, it was something I never saw before. Alice Shepherd, if you've ever seen the beautiful Wheelchair Dancer, she just approaches everything of nothing's good, nothing's best, nothing's better. All that's here is my body. And I think that's just a statement that we should be using not only for our disabled actors or students, but in front for every actor. What a beautiful thing if we actually went to an actor and saw the optimism rather than the pessimism.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just thinking about how the art form of musical theater is predicated on this notion of the triple threat, right? So not only are you going to be or desiring to be an excellent singer, but also dancer and actor. I mean, that's a lot culturally inside of the art form to overcome. But that idea of releasing expectations, not lowering, releasing expectations. So you have no expectation that it's going to be this way or that way, so that it can be what it is and be appreciated for that beauty. It's tough though, because there's, with the canon, and Ben, I would love for you to talk more about a chorus line, because I think there's such expectations around that piece of theater specifically in regards to movement. And I would just love to hear more about the production and how you all navigated that.
Sure. Shall I do that now, or shall we move on to another question? I'm happy to do either. Moderate us, Gwen, moderate us.
Yes, Ben. I was just wanting to interject that it is in musical theater, there is also this this thing where the people, I can't come up with the right words, but there's a hierarchical thing that happens because some people have a lot of money to be trained and some people don't. And so we have this layer of the people with money get further faster, and that feeds into what Michele was just talking about. And
Well,
how do we combat that?
I'll actually jump in there, and I think a way around that is I don't actually look at it as a triple threat. I look at it as a quadruple threat. There's singing, there's dancing, there's acting, and then there's your experience. And somebody with incredible life experience who's been through all, are we allowed to curse on this, by the way?
Yeah.
No, okay, great. Who's been through all the bullshit of life and hasn't had things is always, to me, going to give a more interesting performance. And so what someone might not have in acting, I won't even call it talent, I'll call it acting, education, dance education, musical education. What I have found is usually if you look at what their lives are and how the experiences they have brought into it, an audience very rarely actually cares if you hit the note or not, if you are infusing it with that much love and that much life experience and that much pain. I saw Cynthia Erivo in Color Purple many, many years ago. And I think I saw it like 5 times. Like, that's how much I loved it. And she sings this beautiful song, I'm Here. She hit the note maybe 70% of the time, the final note, and no one even realized, because it was filled with so much pain. And so I think for me at family, like that, we've got about 125 actors on our roster. I'd say about 40 of them have university level training, and the others bring a life experience that is palpable on stage, and I think that's what's vital.
Yeah, great.
Great. My paper just fell on the
Bye, Gwen.
Yep. I had help from a cat, actually. So I want, how do we rethink the modalities of theater that we always think are fact? Britt.
Yeah, well, that's coming up against a whole beast, right? So is the question changing the modalities of theater in the grand sense of theater, this whole thing from Hollywood to Broadway, down to community theater? Or are we talking about the reason the reason why nonprofits like ours exist is because we've seen the need and we've seen the problems, and these nonprofits pop up and these theater companies pop up because we're addressing the problem in the best way that we can. I think taking on a beast such as Hollywood and Broadway, the pendulum is shifting a little bit in the direction. We're seeing more inclusivity on Broadway and in cinema, and disabled characters are being played by disabled actors finally, and that is good. That's showing that the pendulum is shifting, and that people's voices are being heard. But I think there's a lot more to be done, and I think it's just, that's the conversation, is that the question: do we get louder? Do we keep doing what we're doing?
Mm.
Do we try to network more? That is kind of the dialogue right now, right? So
I think there's a shift that's happening culturally that I see in the students that I teach, that they are, I've had students more willing in the past couple of years to divulge if they have a disability. Initially, it was something that maybe would happen. I have them fill out like a goals statement and intention statement at the beginning of the semester. And I always finish with a final question that says, is there anything else you'd like me to know? And I've had a few students disclose a learning disability in the past couple of years. And this past semester, I had 3 students actually file for accommodations with the disability office on campus, which has never happened before. So
Wow.
I actually see that, and I think that's a positive shift, that the stigma of disability is shifting maybe in this next generation, that it's not something, that it's something that people are saying, yes, I need extra help with this. I have accommodations. I have access needs that I'm willing to state. Because I think there's been a lot of fear in, you're replaceable, you're, you know what I mean? There's always somebody else. I think actors have been afraid to claim disability because they're worried that they won't work.
shame, I think it goes into shame and discrimination. And then, it's shifting into being proud of disability. I think social media has a big component in that. Social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram have really shown some light on what it's like to be a content creator that has a disability. At least that's my algorithm. There you go. So that, I think that has helped a lot. That front-facing video content that can be taken on part of the person themselves can show that, hey, we're here, we exist, and there are others like us, versus 10, 20 years ago, we didn't have access to that type of front-facing video content to know that we were not alone. So I think that's a part of it.
But I also think there's more to that. I think the fight has been for representation, and now I think the fight is actually for creativity on the part of the people running the stuff. So Family was created in 1989. It was created because these 5 actors in wheelchairs were auditioning all over Denver. They are actors that will go on to have extraordinary careers in theater and win every award, but they weren't allowed on the stage to even audition, let alone land a part. And what happened in 1989, Miss Saigon won the Tony for Best Musical. Theater had literally found a way to land a helicopter on a fucking stage, but couldn't figure out how to get a person on a wheelchair. You gave me permission to curse, and nah.
I did. The lid is off, Ben.
I think there's also, so there's this idea of like, how are we so creative in every other aspect, but we can't create anything? When Ali Stroker won the Tony for being the first wheelchair user, not the first, excuse me, won the first person to win Best Actress as a wheelchair user. It was the year, if you look there, I can't remember the exact shows, but there were all these innovations on Broadway, and yet they couldn't build a ramp to get Ali Stroker from the audience onto the stage to accept her award. She had to go around. We build ramps all the time. In fact, 75% of musicals probably have a ramp in them somewhere because you got some big piece of scenery that you have to move. I will also say, like, so before I went macro, now I'll go micro. I think we, as artistic leaders, need to relitigate all these things that we take as fact. So, for example, I'll use chorus line. I'll answer Michele's question at the same time. There's this song, I Can Do That, sung by Mike. It's kind of the gateway into the musical, right? You have your first da 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 da, and then the next song you hear is I Can Do That. And it is a tap number, and it is traditionally played by some big, fancy schmancy buff actor with legs to die for who can tap up a storm. And that's what it is. But what is tapping at its essence? It is taking 4 pieces of metal, 4, maybe 6, two on each, 4, and putting it on feet and rhythmically making noise with it. Great. Why? Did God or fate tell us this is what tapping is, and if you do it any other way, you're wrong and it's a sin? No. We invented it, so why can't we rethink it? So for our production, we had an actor in a wheelchair. Great. We go, how do we do that? Interesting. Well, there's 4 pieces of metal, and what do we know? He has very buff arms, as people in wheelchairs do. What if we just take those pieces of metal and sew them onto a pair of work gloves, and he can tap all over his wheels, he can tap all over his chair. We cut out a piece of dance floor. We bought a piece of dance floor. We didn't go with a chainsaw to a dance. And he played on his wheels. He played on this piece of dance floor. He played on another actor. And it was this kind of amazing thing that audiences went crazy for, because this actor, Casey Myers, one day he's going to realize that he's way too talented for my little theater and go to Broadway. But until he realizes that, he's exceptional. And just that rethinking this very simple thing that cost us $25 maybe for a pair of gloves and taps, which are really cheap, suddenly unlocked all of this potential. And I would say it's even better because fingers and hands are way more dexterous than feet. He could actually do more than somebody with years and years of tap experience could do. And it's just that kind of, hey, we've got something, we want something to happen, instead of thinking of all the reasons why, as I said before, instead of thinking about all the reasons why it can't work, start thinking of ways that it can work. And when you do that, directing people with disability is actually quite easy. It's not horribly difficult. People want there to be some huge big answer. It's not. You talk to people, you see what they are best at, you utilize what they're best at to create something beautiful. Yeah.
The problem isn't directing actors with disabilities. The problem is the world outside of the theater. And that's the biggest hurdle, at least in my life, is the directing part. It comes with its own challenges, but that's small in comparison to, perception out there. Like you said, with building that ramp, it wouldn't have cost that much money, but there's this perception of dollars and cents of where are we going to allocate money. Let's do it for a production budget. Let's do it for this. Or, and yeah, I just think talking about it on a more grander scale, it just comes to dollars and cents in terms of accommodations for people in a greater, larger world, especially in this country.
But I also, go ahead, Michele.
I was just going to say, I think that's true. I think that the you can't ignore money, right? We're talking about, if we're talking about Broadway specifically, that is commercial theater, it exists to make money. Investors want to make money back on their investment. And I think the need to make money sometimes becomes the driving factor. And so people are less likely to take risks of any kind, whether they be financial or otherwise. But there's also a sort of fundamental lack of imagination, right? Getting to what Ben is saying about like reimagining what something can be instead of, and this kind of ties into the idea of risk, instead of just doing what's been done before to meet the expectations of the audience, to guarantee butts in the seats, et cetera, et cetera. It becomes this sort of self-fulfilling cycle, which I think is part of the challenge, is breaking out of that, right? Yeah.
No,
But
yeah.
but I also like sort of push back on, which I know you are not saying, this is society's thing of like the number of people that I meet, because I will be honest, this is my 4th podcast today. I do a lot of podcasts and a lot of panels of people being like, hey, we want you to solve our accessibility problem in 45 minutes. Thank you so much.
Won't be done.
And one of the things that I get this a lot, like our theater just isn't accessible. It's in an old church or it's in a storefront. And as much as we would love to have that, $1 million renovation, one, we can't close for a year or else we're done to do these renovations. And we just simply don't have the money. And I think my response is like, it is a great myth that if you can't do everything, you shouldn't do anything, which is, I think, the way that a lot of people view accessibility for audiences and actors. That like I work one of our there's a wonderful theater that we're partnering with here next year called Town Hall Arts Center. Town Hall, they don't really have an elevator that could safely transport audience members into seats. And like the artistic director, every time I meet him, is so embarrassed by this. And I'm like, great. So great. People with wheelchairs probably aren't going to feel welcome in your space because they literally can't get there. Can you do ASL? Like, can you do stuff for the deaf community? Can you do stuff for the blind community? If you have $20, you can make a sensory friendly kit for audiences who have ADHD or autism. It costs $20. I'll give it to you. I'll hand you $20 for you to make it. And that, just offering those, whether people take them or don't take them, create this space of, oh, inclusion matters here. Accommodations matter here. Which is, I think, to what you were saying earlier, Michele, of like, once you start making people understand that their differences are welcome, they will be much more forthcoming with their differences, because the last thing anyone wants is to go to a theater and have everyone's eyes on you. Like,
Yeah.
that is, I have sensory issues with my autism. I can deal with lots of stuff. What I can't deal is if I have a fidget in my hand or I have put a pair of sunglasses on, everyone is staring at me. How am I supposed to enjoy a show? Like, encouraging a theater practice where disability matters and inclusion matters and accommodation matters, and the notion of mind your own fucking business is important. And I think that's what we need to be pushing theaters to do, rather than going, oh, you have to raise more money and more money and more money and more money and more money. Trust me, I look at spreadsheets every day and they keep me up at night on just how much money we don't have. And we're a pretty, solvent theater company right now. There are other ways to be there for the disabled community than by throwing bucks at it.
I think
Yeah.
something that happens in academia anyway is that we are all really passionate about recruiting new students we've never seen before, and that includes students with disability. And I'm thinking about a particular student of ours, Michele, who we recruited 4 years ago, and I was very passionate about recruiting him because he is our first, in my time here, I've been here for 8 years, disabled student. And we recruited him, and then we didn't do anything. We made no access needs for him. We brought him in and we said, you're welcome to be in our program, but we And I had a conversation with him where he said he didn't want any help and he didn't want any accommodations. But I think that something that happens in academia is that we say we want these bigger goals of more diversity, and then we don't do anything to change the way the program works to accommodate the folks who we are recruiting. And I'd love to hear what you all have to say about that.
Mm.
I have-
Well, I think, oh, I'm sorry.
No, please. I'm autistic.
Um,
I'm going to cut you off every time.
I want to answer Gwen's question and also to reinforce something that you said, Ben, which is to do the things that you can do and let people know what you're doing. So, if you are going to have an ASL interpreter, put that in your literature, put that in your promotional work, have it someplace on the website. You know what I mean? Let people know what accommodations will be available so they don't have to wonder, and then give them an opportunity to ask for anything else. And then, do you know what I mean? Like, if you're going to have captioning, if you're going to have audio description, if those things are available, making it known ahead of time, again, shows that you prioritize access, inclusion, accommodation, even if you can't do everything. But to your point, Gwen, I have been at Penn State a little bit longer than you, and I will say that what you described, I have seen in all instances of wanting to recruit a more diverse student body. And I question then, and I question now, that what is the motivation for wanting that diversity? Because when you're not serving the students once they arrive, then I just question the motivation for diversity. That's what I'm going to say. I know that the place I have control and that I can impact is my classroom. So, but the program writ large and the school writ large is not a place that, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you question the motivation of,
Why do we want more diversity? Is it because it makes us look a certain way?
Yes, that's exactly, this is academia.
Right.
So the subtext
Thanks, Britt.
of what you're saying, Michelle's being nice about it. She's like,
oh,
speaking in
speak on it, Britt. Say it.
Yeah, so yeah, 100%. That's exactly why, right? It makes universities and colleges look better on paper. You can say, oh, we have X amount of students with disabilities and X amount of students that are people of color and X amount of students that are low socioeconomic status. And that makes you look, wow, this inclusive, but you're using that as almost like a poster, like your poster children, each group, and then not providing what you promised during orientation or during their tour of campus, so to speak. That happens all the time. It's a universal, or I don't want to say universal. It's a nationwide problem across academia, is to tout how great we are at accessibility and inclusion and then drop the ball. Not saying that all universities are like that, but I'm just saying that that is a common thread among several. And how do we go about changing that and working on the problem?
That's what I would love to talk about.
Well, and I would say that we have gotten much better at Penn State in terms of serving our students of color, for example, right? Or serving students from the LGBTQ community. But I mean, I've been on the diversity committee for 20 years, and rarely does the word disability get spoken. That, I mean, truly, that's not, it's not been a part of the conversation. And that's a big part of the problem.
I think that's because either disabilities have been hidden or our understandings of what disabilities are changing. And
can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Talk about Ben's definition of disability at the beginning took my breath away. So can we talk about that? Can we talk about what disability is and what it means to be inclusive in a musical theater program for people with disabilities, and who are those people? Because when you were talking about that, Ben, I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about me. And I'm not somebody who would identify in that way, but also I had 5 of those things you talked about. So like, who are the people? How do we welcome them? And
It's the silliest conversation ever, because there is this idea that disability is so far off on us. Unless, God forbid, you get hit by a bus tomorrow and pass away, you will eventually become disabled. You will eventually use a walker. Your mind will go, and you will need cognitive help. Your eyesight will go. Every single one of these people here is wearing glasses
I
right
was
now.
just like,
That's a disability. Your eyes are
correct,
not at the level that
correct.
you need to see. This is an accommodation. It's just an accommodation that society has deemed palatable, so
Mhm.
we don't talk about it. What I know that I cannot do, and I would say the biggest flack I get in this position is, hey, you're letting too many people in. What about these people? These people have training. They don't need family. They don't need it. And what I know that, and I mean that specifically of people with depression, anxiety, when, to be honest, like, you want to accommodate a person in a wheelchair, just don't build stairs and done. It's people with those kind of cognitive disabilities, emotional disabilities, trauma-based disabilities that are the hardest to accommodate. What I know that I cannot do is be the judge, jury, and executioner of what it means to be disabled, because that would involve me playing godlike, which is everything that I try and fight against in my work, right? Like, that's how our system is set up. Artistic director is God and has passed over some of these godlike powers to a director who is then going to impart wisdom to an actor. No. So what I know I can't do is pick a definition for disability. If you are someone that needs accommodations, welcome to the theater. And if that's every single person in the world, then that should tell us a little bit about how we run our art form. That every single person could probably go, God, I need an accommodation, or God, I need inclusion.
Yep.
I'll also say, like, I have this saying that's kind of a sexy saying to me, because it's different than what a lot of people say, which is, I like to be reactive instead of proactive. In theater, we are constantly being taught, be proactive. You're a director, you've read the script 600 times, you know, even if you're going to collaborate, you know the direction, you know what everything is. And that sometimes just doesn't work for disability. What I need to do as a disabled director, who, my disability changes every day. We have this tomorrow. I'm quiet as a mouse. I'm not cursing, and I'm speaking very eloquently instead of, like I am now. It's even harder for my actors. What we need to do is look at the thing in front of us and accommodate the need that's in front of us, instead of our perception 3 months ago of what it is. So when I went to DePaul for my MFA, and I studied with the great Lisa Portes, and that was one of the questions she asked, of like, we know you love disability theater, we know that's your passion, we want to support it, we don't know what that means, and we don't know how to accommodate you. And my answer was like, great, I'll let you know. Like, if there is a day that I need an accommodation, I'll tell you. And it's as easy as starting rehearsal 15 minutes and doing a little check-in and just saying, hey, how you doing? How's your energy level? Is anything hurting you today? Which we do, like, I think, I am very much not a dancer. But like, I think a lot of programs do, if you're teaching dance, of like, what's hurting, what's going on. If we include that with disability, that's accommodating, because it's a losing proposition. If I go, great, there's a blind student, and I, as someone who is not blind, am going to try and anticipate every single need ahead of time, I'm going to forget something. I'm going to lose something. I'm going to create a space that is unwelcoming, rather than me just going to the person and saying, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm here for you, and I'm going to react to your needs. And that doesn't mean I can always do it. many accommodations in family that somebody looks at me and they say, I need this. And I go, that's either not possible or it directly conflicts with someone else's accommodation.
I think that is, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful points. And that's from a framework of if someone's comfortable talking about their disability, right? So it's more of like, okay, we have on one hand people that are proud, and then we have some people that are still not that proud, especially if we're talking about academia and we're talking about musical theater programs, where disclosing that they have a disability could be damning to their self-worth, and could be damning towards like how other people perceive them, could make their work environment very uncomfortable for them. And while we can address why that's a problem and all that stuff, that's a big macro issue as well. I think if we want to try to tackle like a universal design for learning for theater activities, it has to include many modalities to open up the conversation of at the beginning of the process that you're using empowering and inclusive language. You have to foster the culture of inclusion, and that goes across not just disabilities but all the isms, right? So it goes across people of color, the queer community, empowering and using inclusive language, building that culture. And we talked about sensory accommodations earlier. I think that's appropriate for anybody. It's not just saying, hey, sensory accommodations, autistic, you autistic people, you get your sensory accommodations. Anyone could benefit from sensory accommodations. You just say, hey, we're doing a sensory accommodation theater production. We're doing accessible auditions at this time. Come if you want. Hey, we're using tactile objects and visual aids, and we're using detailed verbal descriptors. If you need large print, braille, digital formats, screen readers, just fill in this sheet and let us know what you need, without really disclosing the type of disability. If people still want to keep that private, that they have the right to do so, that they don't always forced to disclose their disability, and really make sure that when you're doing an inclusive musical production, which means actors with and without disabilities, that the choreography is adaptable, the blocking is adaptable. It is, you're using inclusive language and assistance the whole time. So these things to consider. Accessible venues and facilities, that's one thing. I know it's hard, with this sort, we talked about that before, but we can really get to the basis of fostering a sense of inclusion and using the language of empowering at the beginning, and then building from there to where people are feeling comfortable, your actors are feeling comfortable to disclose. Maybe they'll disclose something and you can have a better working relationship, but at least they know that there's an option on the table and they don't have to have fear of repercussions of what would happen in that sense of not knowing.
That idea of culture of inclusion is brilliant, and that's what we need to create. If I have an ASL interpreter, but there's no one that uses ASL, there's this great company, I love them very much, but they're like, hey, can we go save you some money? And I keep them there and I keep them doing it because it is important that everyone in that audience sees that this is something that is done.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think the other thing that happens, and we saw this very much when Broadway reopened after COVID, especially with the Black community, remember there were all these plays that were all Black casts, Black subjects, Black everything. And we were so proud of that, right? There were so many amazing people that just, oftentimes white, who went, wow, how incredible. And then in a month, when nobody came, we went, oh, well, that didn't work. They must not want to come. Yeah. You can't create a culture in 1 month. The amount of times people go, hey, we want to do ASL. We want deaf community. And so they have one ASL program. This is a 50-year-old institution.
Right.
And they go one time and nobody comes. And they go, well, what was the point? Like, no one came. And I was like, you have 50 years of history of pushing people out. And just you decide suddenly, congratulations, you're now welcome in the theater. Like, that's it. Like, you have to build.
You have to build and be consistent and show that you mean what you say, not just like, hey, we learned our lesson. Sorry we used that language in the past. Sorry we weren't as inclusive, but now we are. There's a damage there. You have to heal the wounds of history first. And that happens with with showing that you're consistent. If it just doesn't work out, then you can't just throw in the towel. Oh, that didn't work out for us. We're just gonna, not do it anymore because clearly it wasn't successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just echoing what you're saying, Ben. So yeah, I agree.
I had an ASL interpreter come to an event that I was doing as the laureate because I insisted that either ASL interpreter or closed captioning on a monitor, me wearing a headset, both ideally, but one or the other. And so we had an ASL interpreter come, and she said to me, "Are there even any deaf people here?" I said, "I don't know. That's not the point." I was like, "We need you here regardless, right? Maybe just be here. Stick next to me. I'll try to speak as slowly as I can. I'll try not to move and dance, like talk and dance at the same time, because they don't like when you do that." But yeah, it was just funny coming from the ASL person. They were like, "Are there even deaf people here?" And I'm like, "That's not the point."
I know we're running out of time, but I think this is very important. There is something that is very different than disabled people and disability adjacent people. And oftentimes we as a community, not as a community, not as a disabled community, as a society, when we are presented with something we don't know, great, we want to do a sensory friendly performance, which I don't like, but pretend I do. Great, we want to do ASL, great, we want to do audio description. Let's consult the therapists. Let's consult the ASL interpreter and get their perspective. Very rarely do people actually go to the people who need it because we are scared. And so we go to parents who are very knowledgeable. They know all types of things. It's not firsthand experience. I wouldn't go if I am directing a show that has elements of racism within the Black community, pretend I'm directing the show that I would never direct. I'm not going to go to a white professor who does African American studies and history. I'm going to go to someone who is Black and talk about their perspective and give them the play and hear what they're doing. We don't do that with disability, and that's, I would say, 75% of the issue of why the canon is so small of good disabled plays.
I have to wrap us up, but I want to say this about that. So I see a lot people trying, not understanding what's necessary. I certainly don't understand what's necessary. I'm here to learn. But to say that we will do a production where we feel like we want to have a sensory production for people with sensory issues, and we'll invite somebody in to talk to the cast and talk to the director and teach us how to do that, and we'll do that one thing, but it won't have we check that box and say we did the thing. But we don't continue that as a practice. And we also don't understand the impact that it has had, or do any feedback, or do any, like, so that it's just this act of, oh, I did the thing. We took the anti-racism training, and now we're anti-racist, and it, just sort of like, I would love to just close our discussion today to be continued with some thoughts from you about how do we make this a practice that is valuable to the community. I mean, how do we do that in a way? Yeah, I'll leave it there.
I think you got to start with saying, hey, whoever is in charge, the figurehead who's implementing all of this, that's, making the change here, that it needs to be consistent. This isn't like, I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, then we're going to, throw in the towel. Consistency, because that's the name of the game. I circle back to, like, you have to undo a lot of hurt and a lot of pain, and you have to recognize what you're apologizing for before you start trying to figure out a solution. So that, and then creating pathways for these professional opportunities. So bring people in that know their stuff. And a lot of the times, and most of the time, it are people with disabilities that can tell you on behalf of themselves and the disability community what they need. And it's also professionals in the field that work with disabilities that have done this work for a while, like what has been successful for them, strengthening those community bonds, and then enhancing that the reflecting on the values of modern society. So where's the status, where's the temperature status right now in the real world, and how can we use that to impact our vision? And but if I had to sum it up in just one tiny word, it would be consistency in education. Don't always expect people with disabilities to bestow knowledge upon you, that you go out and get the knowledge yourself. I think that's something in the Black community as well, that people, individuals are like, I'm tired of just trying to educate white people. That you go and look for the words yourself. You go and look for the history. You dive into it yourself, and then you immerse yourself in the culture and the community, and get to know people, and stay consistent and strengthen community and build professional opportunities.
I would say make it good.
And make it good. Yeah.
Like there's a reason why I make it very adamant that I'm creating artistically rigorous theater. Going back to that idea of, right after COVID hit or we came back from COVID, there was this idea of, if we just say you should come and spend your $45 at Family or your $300 on Broadway because it's the right thing to do, that does not imprint on people's minds. The number of times I mentor young people who want to direct people with disabilities, and they're like, we have a 5-week rehearsal process. First 2 weeks, we're gonna learn about each other. We're gonna accommodate each other. It's gonna be wonderful. And I'm like, yeah, but when are you gonna rehearse the play? No one. The worst form of accommodation is when you're like, hey, let's do a shitty production, but it's gonna feel really good inside. That sucks. Nobody who's disabled actually wants to do it then. You want to do something that's rigorous. You want to make something that's interesting. And that's how that's why Family has been around for so long, is because audiences keep going. I remember I saw that cool moment or song, and I can go down the list of like 15 moments that have imprinted themselves within the Denver community, that 8 years ago, when we were about to close, the Denver community said, absolutely not. We cannot lose this. So being artistically rigorous to me is just as important as making sure people feel happy.
I'm gonna have to close it there. We're at 8:05. It has been wonderful to talk with you all, and I feel like this is the surface level, and we will continue our conversation and invite more amazing folks on and do part 2, 3, 4, 5 soon. And I thank you.
Diving in.
I thank you for your expertise and your wisdom and your honesty and your kindness, and most of all, your time.
Thank you so much. It
Thanks,
was great to see you all.
everyone. Yeah, good to see you
Here.
all.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.